I'd like to introduce them first. This is Stephen Levy. He's the editor-at-large at Wired. Stephen has interviewed Bill Gates 50 times? Yeah.
Somewhere.
Esther Wojcicki, she's a former journalism advisor. She established the media program at Palo Alto High School. She's an author and an educator. John Markoff is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, former New York Times reporter, also covering technology like Stephen. So let's give him a welcome. So this is a really interesting question, and I think if you're studying journalism or you're interested in pursuing journalism as a career, you might wonder, is it more important to get the experience or to get the education, or is there, a balance in between somehow? So between Stephen and John, I think you have, decades of experience as journalists. I don't think either of you studied journalism in school. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. I never took a journalism course. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, and they had a great journalism program, but I just never took advantage of it. I did write for a semester as a rock critic for the Temple News.
Okay.
So, but didn't get absorbed into the culture of the publication.
And I studied journalism in junior high school, and I taught at both the journalism programs at Stanford and Berkeley at different times.
So I got a master's in journalism from the University of California Graduate School of Journalism, but before that I worked as a journalist for about 5 years before I got the master's. So I don't know, I got the master's, and I must tell you, it was probably the easiest program I ever took, because I pretty much knew everything they were teaching.
Okay, so before we go further with the question of education or experience, what makes a great journalist? I think that's something we should just talk about very quickly. So Stephen, to you, what makes a great journalist?
Doggedness.
Doggedness?
Curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't hurt to write well.
What about you, Esther? What do you think makes a great journalist?
Someone who never gives up, and also who's really independent thinker. So I really like teenagers, because teenagers, for the most part, are independent thinkers. That's the number one driver. And so I think if you're going to be a journalist, start when you're a teenager. And it looks like that's the right age group right here.
Great.
So once upon a time, my role models were I.F. Stone and Lincoln Steffens. When I was growing up, I read about them and I read them. And now I was just thinking about great journalists who I respect now. Two come to mind immediately because they're independent. Molly White, who specializes in reporting on cryptocurrency as an independent person, and Marcy Wheeler, who writes about the U.S. judicial system from Ireland, are examples of sort of following that independent path today.
It seems like there are a lot of independent journalists on Substack now, even more and more. That seems to be a bit of a trend. So let's talk a little bit about how you became journalists, because I think that the audience here are student journalists, but how did you, start as a professional?
Okay, well, I guess when I was in high school, it was quite a different time. People were not as career-oriented generally at an early age, and it was the 60s, and you can kind of skate by without really thinking what you were going to do with your life. And sometime during college, I was an English major and thought, gee, maybe I'll be an English teacher. I'll go to grad school and teach that, and maybe I like to write. Maybe I'll write some novels. As soon as I got to graduate school, I realized I didn't really want to spend my life in academia. So while I was in graduate school, I took an internship at the local newspaper in central Pennsylvania, and thought, that's interesting. Maybe I could be like a writer, in nonfiction. And when I got a master's in came back to my hometown, Philadelphia, thought, how can I do this? I just walked into the Alternative Weekly and started doing stories and figured out that the next step would be a magazine writer. And for the next couple of years, I eked out a meager living writing magazine features for Philadelphia Magazine and the magazine The Philadelphia Inquirer, which the latter part, I really got a taste of what real journalism was like, kind of going in and out of there with assignments, because that time they were winning Pulitzer Prizes, and and that was like a real newspaper.
Like the show.
Yeah. So by the time I was out and took a real job, I was a journalist.
It's amazing. So John and Esther, I have a little bit of a different question for you than this, but John, so what about you? What was your path to become a journalist?
So a lot of it's about serendipity. I ran my college newspaper, and I had to make a decision about what I was going to do when I grew up, when I left college. And it was the midst of the Vietnam War, so that influenced a lot of the things that I was thinking. And I thought about applying to Columbia Journalism School, but I ended up applying to go to graduate school in sociology because I was very influenced by people like C. Wright Mills and G. William Domhoff. There was this thing called power structure research. It was a form of journalism, actually, and it seemed more relevant. And I got to the University of Oregon, and on the first day I was there, I realized I'd made a mistake. It was a vocational training program. I didn't want to be a sociologist, but I had a fellowship. So it took me about 4 years to unwind that career path. And then I decided I would try to become a journalist, but at that point in the 1970s, if you were going to work for a metropolitan daily, you had to go to journalism school. And I hadn't done that, and I decided I would go back to the Bay Area. There was this thing called Silicon Valley. I was very interested in the way the military was using technology, so I thought I'd write about that, and I was super lucky. There was an alternative news service. They discussed alternative news services or in the last panel called Pacific News Service. So I gave myself 5 years to freelance and get to a metro paper. And because I was a Pacific News Service, although I was making no money, I was basically starving. I had bylines from every major newspaper in the country. So I had a library, a portfolio of clips. But there was this moment after 5 years where I was about to give up because I was not making a living. And I started looking in the Palo Alto Times for jobs. And Palo Alto had just started a recycling program. And I thought, well, and they were looking for drivers, people to drive the trucks. And I thought, well, that's honest work. I'll apply for a job driving a truck at the recycling program. And I called the guy, and he said, God, I just hired someone. But stay in touch. I like college-educated people. So I didn't get that job. But the next week in the Palo Alto Times, there was a job for a reporter at a little startup paper called InfoWorld, which reflected the emerging personal computer industry, and I got a job at InfoWorld. So I often think about what would have happened if I'd gotten a job driving a truck rather than working for InfoWorld.
So it's almost like one thing led to another, yeah. And Esther, so you took a degree in journalism, and then you started to teach. What made you decide to teach journalism, and how did you develop the program at Palo Alto?
So, I started as a journalist at the age of 14, your age roughly, a little older maybe you are. And then I got a degree in journalism because this was in the 1960s. Women were not journalists. So I thought, well, I'll have a degree and I have experience, so maybe I'll get hired. Wrong. Couldn't get in. Women were banned in the San Francisco Press Club. Women were banned from journalism until the beginning of the 1980s. It was ridiculous. The only thing I was allowed to write was for the women's section. You guys probably remember the women's section. Newspapers used to have news, opinion, sports, and women's section. Guess what was in the women's section? Recipes. How to buy a good appliance for your kitchen. How to take care of your husband. I'm not kidding, it was crazy. I could not get in I couldn't be a real journalist. All I could do was write for the women's section. So I thought to myself, I'll do it anyway. I'll teach journalism, and then all those students can go out and be journalists. That's how I ended up being a teacher at Palo Alto High School and starting what is today the largest journalism program in the U.S.
Let's give her that's amazing. A lot of credit. It was not easy back then. It really was not easy back then.
It was not only not easy, it was like impossible.
Yeah, impossible.
I guess I could have dressed up and pretended I was a man or something, but I didn't do that.
So John and Esther, both of you have taught journalism. And Stephen, you haven't taught journalism, if I'm not mistaken. You have not taught it.
Actually, I did at one point taught a class at the Philadelphia Community College in journalism. It was one semester.
So I'm just curious, having been journalists, all of you, what was it like to teach journalism, and did that change your perspective at all about anything? How you communicate, once you have to explain something to somebody else, like you're already, you must all be really good writers already, I know you are, but teaching that to somebody or teaching somebody something that you do for a living, that's almost like the air you breathe. How was that?
So I taught at UC Berkeley during that phase change, during the dot-com era when the internet emerged. And it was both super exciting and heartbreaking. What I found, people had to have careers. And there was this period, particularly in the last 2 years, when the internet bubble was in full froth and the world of journalism was changing dramatically. And some of my best students decided to go into public relations rather than going into journalism. And I was trying to convince them to be journalists, but even, this was now almost 25 years ago, even then it was not a clear career path, so it was very difficult to make the argument, and there were good jobs in public relations at that point, and the world had changed, so it was hard for me.
What about you, Esther? The perspective of teaching a subject like journalism.
So I loved teaching journalism because I was teaching the age group that I really liked, 14 to 18. And I think that the reason I liked it the most is because teenagers the natural instinct is to be independent. You want to think for yourself. You don't want people telling you what to do all the time. You want to come up with your own ideas. I thought that was great. So I just bought into that, and I loved teaching high school students. I also taught at the university level as well, but I thought the sweet spot was really 14 to 18 was the most exciting time for me to teach journalism. And many of my students went on to full-time careers in journalism. I have perhaps students on every major newspaper in the country.
It's amazing, and the influence, of what you've done is just amazing, and every teacher who teaches journalism too, because there are so many skills that you learn from journalism education, whether it's communication skills, but independent thinking, media literacy, all these things that are really important no matter what you do for a profession.
So one of my goals is to have all students in the U.S. have at least one semester of journalism training, media literacy training, because it's the only curriculum that naturally requires critical thinking. So all of you are learning critical thinking whether you even know it or not. And most students in the United States do not study any subject that requires critical thinking. They require memorization. Just think about all the classes you take that require you to memorize. And then if you memorize, you don't understand it, it doesn't matter, you just have to memorize.
It's true. It's astounding.
Yeah, try all the sciences.
Yeah. So just to talk a little bit about technology for a moment. You both, Stephen and Esther and John, have had major careers having to do with technology, Silicon Valley. So I'd like to hear, what was it for you that either a light bulb turned on and you said, this is it. I love this. I've got to do this.
So I was a freelance writer in New York in the early 1980s, and I got a random assignment. Actually, it was from Jane Fonda's production company, an editor there who used to edit my wife at the Village Voice. And they had this idea. They would come up with concepts and give it to journalists who would then write a story about it, and they would pre-option it for a movie. So the idea they came up with is, who are these people called computer hackers? Right?
Oh, hackers?
And hackers,
Yeah.
yes. And this is like in 1981. And literally, I had never touched the computer keyboard until that moment. And they said, well, why don't, if you get to place this with the magazine, we'll give you some money to option it. And, in addition to your fee. So I was writing for Rolling Stone then, and pitched it to Rolling Stone, and they said, okay. And I got someone to show me how a computer works. Someone who was actually a computer science professor at Columbia, Genevieve Cerf, who taught me that. And then I went out to California and met a lot of people who were doing this, and I hung out around Stanford. And I thought I was going to write about these people who were these antisocial super nerds who, were, plotting I don't know what, but, just basically an unattractive subculture. But instead, I found people who really were, thrilling people who were doing super creative things on the computer. And what's more, it was really clear that they were the future. What they were doing was something that all of us were going to be doing to some degree. So after I did the story, I just wanted to write more and more about it. I thought this is a fascinating subject. And I was in a great position because at that time, the personal computer revolution was just beginning, and most of the publications that wrote about it were written by hobbyists. Mm-hmm. But they were getting fat and getting advertising, and they wanted to be more professional, so they wanted to hire, quote, real writers to write for them. And then on the other hand, the traditional publications I was writing for were curious about the subject matter, and they said they wanted someone who they knew who could write about this stuff and bring in the stories. So I kept doing it more and more, and I'm still doing it.
Thank God. What about you, John?
So I think this is probably the one thing of value that I have to say to you guys. I showed up in Silicon Valley a couple of years before Stephen, actually, and I was still really as much an activist as a journalist. I was trying to figure out what the U.S. military was going to do with technology after the war in Vietnam and write about it. And I was lucky. A Quaker family had given me $10,000 to be a reporter and write about that. But I stumbled across a book written by a British computer scientist called The Micro-Millennium. This was 1977. Christopher Evans, he was a psychologist and a computer scientist. And that book made the argument that the microprocessor was going to change the world. And I thought, I'll write about that. And in fact, the microprocessor did change the world. Probably the best example, there's a computer scientist that both Stephen and I know, whose name is Danny Hillis, and about, 50 years ago, 40 or 50 years ago, he gave a talk at the New York Hilton. And he made this argument that the microprocessor was going to change the world. And there was some guy in the audience who stood up and said, that's crazy. If that's true, there's going to have to be a microprocessor in every doorknob in this hotel. And Danny came back 20 years later, and there was a microprocessor in every doorknob in that hotel. And essentially, I made a career out of writing about the impact that the microprocessor was having on the world. And I would suggest you can still make a career that way. You can find something you're passionate about that seems like it's going to have an influence on the world, and you can write about it. And that's an opportunity.
Yeah, John, is being modest. When I started writing about technology, everyone told me, you've got to meet John Markoff. There's this guy. He's like you, but he's been doing it, and he worked for InfoWorld at the time, and so one day I called him up, and we just
together.
met. Yeah, what? Yeah, and we just met. And, it turned out that John was a perfect person to talk to because he knew this stuff inside out. And we've been, friends really ever since, but both tracking this world.
Yeah, John gave an amazing talk in my journalism class. I mean, it's the one I told you that I'm really regretful I never recorded.
I'll give it again.
You'll do it again. Yeah, it was incredible. He knows so much. I mean, knows the whole history. He's a walking textbook of all the history of Silicon Valley. But then I should just tell you that my program was the first program using computers in the state of California. And the reason was because I first won a grant from the state of California for 6 Macintoshes. And secondly, I was really lucky. I met Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs gave me computers, as long as I wouldn't talk about it or tell anyone else that he gave them to me. Of course, now he's not here anymore, so it's okay for me to tell you that. And so my students loved the computers because they felt that they were on the cutting edge of everything. And they were. It was really exciting. We used those little tiny Macintoshes. I don't know if you've ever seen them, one piece. It said hello on the screen. Yeah, it was much better than a typewriter, I can tell you. My students hated typewriters.
And if anyone is thinking of writing about technology, I have to say it's still a great time to jump in. I remember I was talking to Stuart Brand, who's sort of a pioneer of the counterculture. John actually wrote a biography of him, and I was saying, wow. When I started writing about technology, it was just a few years after Apple was founded. Boy, and if I had been around then, I could have written about the early days of Apple Computer. I sort of missed out. And Stuart said, Stephen, people are going to come to you and ask you what it was like now in the 1980s. And he was absolutely right. And I feel now is actually the most exciting time, the most transformational time in the field that I'm writing about because of AI. And if someone started writing about technology today, they would be coming in early.
I just have to say something about Esther's program, because as a student journalism in junior high school, I mean, my world was limited to manual typewriters and a mimeograph machine. And I had gone to Arizona State University and seen this remarkable building that the journalism program is in. And a couple of weeks later, Esther invited me to give a talk at the Media Arts Center that she has put on the Palo Alto High School campus. And it seemed like it was an exact replica of this unbelievable building full with all kinds of technology. I was so jealous of what your kids get to do, and you're teaching them critical thinking, which is really important.
So that building, I just want to tell you, we went and looked in that Arizona. We looked at all the buildings before we came up with a plan. And we thought, oh, that's a great building. And so we copied a lot of their ideas.
You shrank it and put it at Pali.
We have a wonderful building. My program was initially in portables. You guys probably all know what a portable is. And they jammed 65 people into one portable. And so people were sitting on the floor, on the counter. They were doing all kinds of crazy things. And it's kind of funny. They loved it. They loved being crazy. But now I have this incredible 25,000 square foot beautiful building.
So I have to say, to Stephen's point about writing now, I mean, I feel like I just missed the golden age of journalism in some weird way in terms of the tools that are now just showing up for a new generation of journalism. I lived in a world where I used a paper notebook, and the reality was I couldn't read my handwriting a half an hour after I'd taken the notes. And now there are tools like Otter, which not only gives you a perfect, audio recording, it gives you a good transcript, and then you can have a conversation with your interview right after you had it. I mean, the tools that we have now are so far beyond anything I could have imagined for doing the kind of work we do.
Yeah, it's amazing. You know, I also have a nonprofit at the University of Oregon called Journalistic Learning Initiative, and I can tell you they're also using a lot of these tools. They have one called Murrow, named after Edward R. Murrow, in which they help student journalists get the information that they need. It's powered by AI. So you guys should all look up Murrow, M-U-R-R-O-W. It's specifically for high school journalism students.
It's amazing. I have a quick question. We're getting close to where we're going to start taking student questions.
Okay.
So I wanted just to bring the conversation back to where we started, which is how important is going to journalism school versus just going out there and getting internships and just going for it?
So, I don't know. I feel there's no set answer. When I left graduate school, after my 3-month internship at the Center Daily Times, I sent out resumes to all these places and didn't get one answer, really. And it wasn't until I went out on my own and, really built a big, huge collection of clips and got established that, I started writing for Newsweek and that after 15 years of being a freelancer, started working there, when I was like in my 40s. But I noticed there, that a lot of the people who started there, the people whose resumes did get answered, went to Columbia Journalism School, or maybe Northwestern or things like that. Mainly Columbia Journalism School. And, so I don't know whether what they learned at Columbia Journalism School was something that helped them develop skills that they didn't have before. You'd have to ask them. But I do know that as a credential, that got them into the door of a place like Newsweek. Now, there aren't many places like Newsweek anymore.
Right.
Like Newsweek isn't a place like Newsweek anymore.
No.
So, I might say your choices would be limited if you wanted to, go on that path. But, you'd have to ask around, to other folks whether the actual skills that you learned at a graduate school in journalism, or even an undergrad school of journalism, as opposed to starting a Substack or working for some digital news operation is going to put you in better stead. I do know that it is eminently possible to learn the skills of journalism outside of a classroom, and I assume in a directed way inside a classroom. Esther's churned out people who were much more capable of journalism than before they walked in her classroom. So, you pick your choice.
So I wouldn't skip journalism school. If you can go to journalism school, go. What you'll get there are a couple things. You'll get a couple of years or a year to perfect your skills. You'll get the ability to freelance and pick up a portfolio you might not have. But most importantly, you might have a chance to find mentors like Esther. That's worth everything in the world, and don't pass that up. As a matter of fact, when you look for a graduate school, don't look for the brand, look for where you can find the best people to study with.
So I do think that a journalism education would help you a lot if you want to go into journalism, especially today. You have data journalism. You have a lot of technology involved in journalism that would really help a lot. So you can do it on your own, but I think it's harder. It's just harder.
Well, and also, a topic like covering technology, that's very specialized, and having the understanding, the knowledge that you share, that you both have, you don't acquire it overnight, basically.
I think it's probably more difficult than it used to be to start from scratch and work your way up, because a lot of the places that, traditionally people would go into entry level, like local newspapers, right. And the alternative weeklies that I started at just aren't around anymore.
Right.
If I were in this position now, the position I was in 1975, that I am now, there aren't great alternative weeklies you could just walk in and people would give you, a complicated feature assignment and pay you $10 if it worked out. So to do that on-the-job training, I think it's kind of tougher.
So although I have to say it was very generational. In 1993, I started teaching a course at Berkeley about how to use the internet as a reporting tool. And in 2 years, I realized the kids knew more about the internet than I did, so I flipped the course, and we taught about reporting about the internet from then on out.
I can see that. I mean, things have changed a lot. I mean, of course, anybody who has a phone can be a publisher, and people are. People are creating content all the time, not necessarily working for legacy media or, any brand necessarily. So it's a bit different. But I do think that, for example, school publications, one of the things that we've been talking about recently is that school publications have been covering more and more local news and news of their communities, and are becoming more and more trusted sources for news in their own communities. So it's interesting what's happening. So we have some time for questions. I can give you my mic.
My name is Kate, and I'm from Monte Vista High School. And my question is, how has changes in modern technology like AI or artificial intelligence changed how you guys teach journalism to your students?
So it's changed a lot because prior to having AI, I would have to write up or find a good model for students to look at. So if I had to say, I want you to write a feature about beaches, I'd have to look it up or write it myself so it would provide a model. Now I don't have to do that. I can just have AI do it and provide the model. And then also I can teach my students how to use AI themselves to provide good models for their own writing. So it's made a huge difference for everything. I think it's harder to teach news writing with AI because I usually did news writing with real things that happened. But you can still ask AI to write you a news story about something, and then it's a good model. I think AI is extremely helpful.
I'm not teaching now, but one thing I've noticed, for a number of years at Stanford, I was invited down to the CS department to give a talk for a class on the ethics of hacking, of computer hacking. This is black hat hacking as opposed to white hat hacking. And it was the only ethics class on campus. And now at Stanford, you can't throw a Coke bottle in any direction without running across an ethics class, because everything is an ethical muddle, and the rise of these tools has raised all kinds of questions about where you draw lines and how you use these tools in good and bad ways.
Well, with Murrow at University of Oregon, we're trying to help student journalists use AI intelligently. So I suggest, just go online. It's easy to access, and you can do it easily without a lot of problems.
I'm actually going to ask you. I'm just curious there. Have any of you ever written a first draft using chatbot? There's one honest person.
Hi there. My name is Luca Heinzman. I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan's Community High School. I really loved what you said about critical thinking, and I was curious what strategies or how you plan to make that a required class across America.
So I'm working with, there's a media literacy organization. I'll tell you, it's hard, especially in today's world, because they don't really want all of you guys to be critical thinkers, unfortunately. But I'm working with that organization, and then I'm working with University of Oregon. I mean, I'm on a mission to change this. So I just came back from Hong Kong, and they're going to do a lot of what I suggest. And I do think that we need to have more schools here in the U.S. do it. I cannot believe that they are not teaching kids how to write for the internet or write for the web. I mean, we've been living now with the web for a long time, and kids still don't know how to write for it. So if you have media literacy, it would teach you all the skills, everything you need for teaching, for being a media literate human being for the 21st century. And where is it? I mean, if you wouldn't be taking journalism, where would you be learning this? Where? Do you guys know? No one's teaching it at all.
I think that it's part of some curricula, but it depends on the program. It's not a nationwide effort yet. I mean, we hear it from some of our instructors that they include it as part of what they teach. And, you know, it's a very important thing. I mean, obviously, it's not...
I'm talking about middle school. They start using it in middle school. What about all those kids? You know, they need to be intelligent users.
Absolutely. I mean, it's for everything, for everybody.
So if anyone wants to help, I'm opening up the door. Sign up. I need a lot of help.
We all need help with that. Anybody have any more questions? Okay. And the blue shirt?
So us three go to Gun. So we're very jealous of our crosstown rival journalism program. And one of the questions I had for you, Ms. Wojcicki, is how did you manage to grow the journalism program to be so big?
Well, let me tell you, one of the main things students are very worried about in high school is their grade, right? You don't want to get a bad grade. So in my program, you got to learn to write, and you never had to worry about your grade because you got to revise until it was right. So everybody got an A. And they got credit at the University of California, A to G English credit. So it was a great way to get English credit, not worry about your grade, have a good time. By the way, we provided snacks. You know, teenagers are super hungry. Snacks being pizza. I think all teenagers are born Italian. And so that's how it got to be so big. Yeah, there's about 700 kids taking journalism at Palo Alto High School. And those are the reasons. They get an A, they get good food, they have a lot of fun, they never have to go home, they get free counseling. That's the answer.
All right. My name's Ezra. I also go to Gun. My question's primarily for you, Mr. Levy. So I know, like, as part of Wired, you're writing a lot in Silicon Valley, and like Gun is also in Silicon Valley. And I was wondering, like, what you kind of expect from a newspaper based in Silicon Valley, like anything like that we should add to like our news and stuff.
I didn't understand it. Can you repeat that again?
The last part.
Like being that you write a lot for Silicon Valley, like based like news, like is there anything that you expect from a newspaper in Silicon Valley, like at a high school level?
You mean that's different from a regular newspaper?
Yeah, high school level.
What to expect from a newspaper?
Yeah. I'm not quite sure. I'm getting at it. But basically, the places that cover Silicon Valley.
The Mercury and the Chronicle are the classic.
It used to be the local papers really covered Silicon Valley really well, but they've gone on hard times, and it's really the national publications that are aggressive about covering it now.
Although I have to say, the Wall Street Journal just had a draconian layoff, and they laid off many of their technology writers. So I don't know the extent of that would be true.
I don't know. Maybe they kind of did a doge to the Wall Street Journal, and wanted to strip it down, and maybe they'll build it up again, or maybe not. But I've always had a fun time. I live in New York, and I've spent a lot of time out there covering it, because that's really where the action has been and still is, and some often have to translate, not so much at Wired, but it was at Newsweek, translate to my editors what was happening there, because I was part of the Silicon Valley culture on one hand, and part of the journalism culture in the other hand. There was two worlds. I would, defend journalism to Silicon Valley and defend Silicon Valley to my editors.
Hi, my name is Satvika Ramanathan, and I'm from the Huron Emory in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I was wondering, so you had said that you have 700 kids in your journalism program and like free A and everything. We don't have that many people at all, but we do have an option where people get an English like credit for doing newspaper, and we find that we struggle a lot with students signing up just for the free English credit and not really caring about the class. Do you experience that at all, and like how do you deal with it?
Well, so the main thing, if you're a journalist and you're publishing, the main thing you have to worry about is your reputation. You know, you don't want to look silly when you publish something. And so that's one of the things that I make sure the student editors are in charge. Every article has to be well crafted, and you have to meet the expectations and the deadlines. So with 700 kids, by the way, there's 14 magazines, 1 newspaper, television every day, and filmmaking. So that's where they're spread out in all these different publications. But I think the motivation is if you want an article and you want your name on it, you want it to be good because it's the audience is the community, and it's also online. So are your publications online? I couldn't hear it. Oh, you have all
Print,
of
web,
it.
and social.
So people must be concerned about their name on an article that isn't good. I think you need to focus on that because no one wants to write an article that is poorly constructed and people don't appreciate. So that was the motivation in the program was, we always wanted to win a gold crown. And so, they were like working like little beavers all the time, and if they didn't win a gold crown, there was a community sigh of, that was terrible. So they won a lot of awards, and then I guess that was the main thing. Is there anything, I also recognized students every time a publication came out, we did a critique of the whole publication, and the editors led that critique. So, people worked really hard because they wanted to have nice things said about them during those critiques, which happened every 2 weeks, by the way. That was a good question. Thank you.
I should mention that we actually offer free publication critiques during the convention in room 555 if you want to sign up for one. So just so that everybody knows. Are there any more questions? Okay. We'll have to go quick.
Hi, I'm from Monte Vista High School as well, and my question was about journalism in general. I think recently in the news, like for example, AP News has been banned from the White House, and how does that connect to education of journalism for high schoolers? Is it under threat, and how do you think we should combat, and how do you think we should keep education about journalism for high schoolers?
Did you hear that?
The question
Can you repeat it, please?
So the question is, given how AP was banned from the White House for not going with Gulf of America.
AP?
Associated Press was banned from the, the question is, how will that impact high school journalists, and should they be concerned about it?
You mean the Associated Press?
Just in general, I think it's more about banning free speech in general.
All right, so what are we doing about banning free speech? I'm a rebel, in case you guys didn't figure that out already. I think you should continue to talk about whatever it is and write about whatever it is you want to write about. The young people, you're the future, it's your country. And if you think free speech is important, you should continue to write about things that are important to you. And don't fall into this, everybody is afraid business to write about whatever they want to write about. The student press can write about whatever they want. I don't think Trump is going to come after you. And even if he does, then it's time for you to come after him.
Yeah, my publication, Wired, has been super aggressive in covering particularly the Doge Elon Musk dismantling of the government, and he's accused us of breaking the law for, what he says is doxing the people who, are government employees who doing things that everyone should know about. And, I, really admire our editor, who just happens to be my boss, but she's, led us in taking a really tough stand, and we've been briefed, on protecting ourselves. And the people writing these stories, have become kind of public figures on their own. But this is why we do it, to speak truth to power. And if, as Esther says, if you're not prepared to do that, you really should rethink being a journalist, because that's the core of it. A lot of times, in stuff that doesn't even deal with national issues, but just a question of you're writing about someone, and you have unflattering things that you find out in your reporting. They might seem like a nice person, but you've got to go and write that stuff that you find that's relevant to the story. I wrote a story last week about this book written by a former Meta Facebook employee that Meta was attacking, and after I wrote the story, both the company and the author were furious at me. But you're not here to make friends.
I mean, you're basically here, you have to think about the purpose of journalism. It's basically to inform the electorate of what's really going on, and not to cover it up, and not to pretend it's not happening. So that is one of the things that I think is really important. I mean, Thomas Jefferson basically said that you can't have a democracy unless you have an informed electorate. You can't have a democracy without a press, a free press. Of course, they seem to be forgetting all this in Washington these days, but we can't forget it. It's really
and by the way,
important.
this isn't the drawback to journalism. This is the good thing about journalism. That's the thing that, it gets, like I know it's this case with John, it gets a lot of excited about journalism, and to, amplify your voice, to report out things that people should know, and it's like a fun thing.
Anything to add, Esther?
No, that was it. Just, I think it's really exciting to see all of you here at the conference, and the fact that you're all involved in journalism. And I'd like to congratulate you and say, I think the future lies in you and your thoughts. And whatever you're thinking, just believe in yourself. Don't let other people tell you something that is going to doubt your own opinions or doubt yourself. Look it up yourself, and then believe in what you're doing.
Very well said. John, anything to add?
Oh, I guess it was either William Randolph Hearst or perhaps George Orwell who said, news is something that somebody doesn't want you to know. Everything else is public relations. Remember that.
That's right. Thank you very much to Stephen, to Esther, and to John. Thank you.